Hey there, I'm Eli Delventhal. I functioned as the producer, team manager, and programming lead for the massively multiplayer online role-playing game, the Spacebar Time Continuum, which was created by 17 people in the spring of 2008 at the University of Redlands. All planning for the game happened in 2007, the previous fall, by me and Chris Young, who is my co-producer as well as the artist lead. Aside from Chris Young and I, the team consisted of 5 programmers, 7 artists, 1 writer, 1 cutscene artist, and 1 description writer. In case you hadn't guessed from this video that you've seen already, the game was written in and created in Second Life, which is an online world where the users can create the content they want using a scripting language, which is called Linden Scripting Language, as well as in-game development tools and creation tools such as 3D modeling creation and 3D primitive construction and the like. Here you can see a player going through the tutorial section of the game where a talking police line instructs him on how to continue. The player recently acquired their suit and the various pieces of their display from the nearby lockers. The tutorial is very simple. It teaches him how to advance dialogue messages, how to invite players to a party, and how to engage in combat. You can see right here that it's talking to the player to invite it to a party. He'll click the Invite Players button in order to continue the tutorial. Now that he's invited the police line, it will respond shortly. And there's the response. From there, the police line teaches the player to attack with a weapon, which is as simple as clicking on the screen. It also makes sure that the player has the weapon attached and is facing the proper direction. Just like I mentioned, all the player has to do is click on the screen, and then you can see him fire his crossbow at the police line. The result is a small block that takes the player behind the impassable wall of the tutorial, allowing them to play onward. In addition, the police line attacks the player back, dealing them a very small amount of damage. This way they can see how combat works and what happens on their display as they take or deal damage. The police line also warns against removing the HUD or the dialogue HUD, which are necessary to be able to play the game correctly. Because of the way Second Life works, it is still possible for players to remove these items that determine all the game's functionality. Finally, the player moves onward by clicking the block that takes them beyond the tutorial. Here you can see an example of one of the cutscenes, all inked by Ember Grossman and colored by Sarah Butterworth, and a bit of the story written by Leia Della Porta. There are over 30 cutscenes and 40 pages of dialogue. Now I'm going to traverse through the first level, the Spacetime Police Quarters. You can see that one of the stools came to life and chased the player as a monster. This is all part of the storyline. Because of a break in the space-time continuum, all worlds and dimensions are going haywire, including this one. Here notice that one of the lamps from the ceiling has also dropped down and is chasing him. If he wanted, he could fight back and kill both of the monsters, but for now we're just going to show you the level itself. Later on we'll take a look at the combat system. On the left is a vicious bladed table that grows scary when approached, but it's paralyzed from previous combat and so will not be chasing the player. Now the player backs out of the room, running away in a panic. In the center of the room is the hourglass that is a symbol of the space-time police. The player continues to flee so that he can demonstrate the rest of the level without needing to fight. There are 2 other exits to this room, one that leads to a boss, and the other that leads to an elevator. We'll go to the elevator now. Looks like he got away, but the monsters joined him in the elevator. Looks like he might have to fight. Nope, they fortunately got stuck at the top. One of the monsters dropped in behind the player. Looks like he'll go to no ends to follow the player. This is only the first level, and many of the other levels, the monsters will stop after a certain radius. Oh, he deleted the monster, so he's a cheater. But don't worry about it, regular players can't do that, and we're going to show combat later. Ahead you can see where the space-time operatives go to save the day. They take this spaceship and one of the 3 exits to go fix the problems on a certain world. Let's go to level 1, the Robot Bear Elderly Person world. A loading screen comes up, and soon we have arrived. As I mentioned, the first level is a world where only robots, bears, and elderly people exist. The robots are known for their long-range brutality, the bears come into short range to maul their prey, and the elderly people use the magic spells of, well, elderly people. This is the most lighthearted level of our game, which should be quite obvious. The player is currently being attacked by a top bot, one of the most primitive models. Because he's such a terrible shot, he keeps missing it, and is constantly receiving damage as it hits him. Once again, he turns and runs, clicking on the gates to enter the village. After a quick load, he finds himself in the town square. The town is run by bears and Final Fantasy chocobos, although the latter are only placeholders for the elderly people that were never finished. The town consists of a few buildings, all of which are in the storyline. The general plot is that the robots are causing a ruckus amongst the bears and the elderly people, and you've got to stop the evil robot leader. Let's pause for a moment to take a look at our protagonist, Spacebar. He has golden spiky hair and a visor over his face, which represents the HUD that the player sees. The visor sports a power button, which is featured many times in the storyline. You can also see one of the many weapons here, the Book of the Dead. It shoots a destructive field, damaging all nearby enemies. The item is actually a reward for defeating Satan himself. Next, we'll explore the confusing forest maze. If I had shown some of the cutscenes in this area, you would have been able to see the bears contracting Spacebar to find the lair of the robot leader. Because this level can be so long, however, we're zipping through it, just so you get a feel for it. Inside the forest there are many things, such as keys and their corresponding chests. The chests contain both money and some of the less powerful items in the game, seeing as this is the first level. Just like in any RPG, the items increase in power the further you go. However, some very special items constantly adapt to your player's level. Finally, we'll exit the woods and enter the coal mine. To do so, we have to click on a wall of vines and climb up them. This is met with a brief loading screen until the player ends up in the coal mine. The coal mine is very similar to the forest maze in that it is large and confusing, although unlike the forest maze, there is only one real path to follow. Each stemming tunnel will end up in the same place at the end. While we're on the topic of the levels, one of our programmers and one of our artists work together on all level design, Philip Rajkani and Logan May. Logan was responsible for all texture work, whereas Philip scripted all environmental effects. Together they came up with all the twists and turns of every level in the game. As I briefly mentioned before, the end of the coal mine is home to the evil robot leader. Normally there would have also been monsters in the mine, but our development time ended before we could place all of them. The robot leader hides himself until a player walks into the mine and alerts him. You can see that he was camouflaged as a rock, but comes out to fight once the player comes close. This is made via an animation program we wrote in Second Life, although we did not have time to create his attack animation as well. Here is where we demonstrate combat. The player is attempting to defeat the robot leader by shooting from his spellbook, but he is vastly overpowered. On the top left of his HUD you can see that his hit points are going down much faster than the robot leader's are. In fact, the player has been killed. As a result, a boat to the land of the dead appears, and the robot leader ignores the player. The player has to fight out of hell before he can try again. After a quick loading screen, the player will be ejected into hell. The only way out again is to complete a challenge. The land of the dead consists of 3 challenges and a final boss. In order to go back to the regular world, the player must win at least 1 challenge. In order to fight the boss, Satan, the player must complete all 3 of the challenges, which are the challenge of wit, the challenge of strength, and the challenge of skill. They are all very different, and it requires a well-rounded player to oppose Satan himself. First, we'll take a look at the challenge of wit. You are met by a creepy old spirit guide who likes to be condescending and ask riddles. He thinks he's the smartest being in all the dimensions, so in order to get out of hell you've got to prove him wrong. Once you step onto his golden pad, he will ask you a riddle. There are only around 10 riddles programmed as of now, but we have room for up to 255 of them. They were all thought up by Ryan Glidden, who also programmed the guide itself. Once the guide asks the player the riddle, they can type in and say their guess. If the guide thinks them wrong, he banishes them from the wit challenge for 2 minutes. If they're right, he grants them the essence of wit, which will allow the player to go back to the surface.